The frozen winds of 442 be howled across the barren landscape like the death songs of 1,000 civilizations. Commander pulled his thermal suit around his forearms as he watched the human settlement through his scope. 3 days they had been observing these strange bipedal creatures, and nothing about them made sense. The Galactic Council had sent the Empire's finest military unit to this remote world with a simple mission: eliminate the human colony before it could establish a foothold in contested space. Intelligence reports painted humans as violent, unpredictable savages who destroyed everything they touched. The Council feared what would happen if these creatures spread beyond their tiny home system. A's mandibles clicked nervously as he studied the settlement below. The humans had built their colony in the worst possible location, a windswept valley with no natural shelter from the planet's brutal storms. Any sensible species would have chosen the thermal caves to the south or the geologically stable plateaus to the east. Yet here they were, somehow not only surviving but apparently thriving in conditions that would kill most civilized beings within hours. Commander, his second-in-command, Lieutenant, approached with careful steps on the icy ground. The orbital bombardment codes are ready. We can level their settlement within minutes. A lowered his scope and looked at his lieutenant. A was young, barely past her molting season, and eager to prove herself in combat. She had volunteered for this mission specifically because it meant action against the infamous humans. Like most of the younger generation, she had grown up on stories of human brutality and conquest. Hold position, Lieutenant. Something is not right here. Sir, the mission parameters are clear. The Council wants this human infestation removed before it can spread. A's 4 eyes focused on different sections of the human settlement. In his 40 years of military service across dozens of campaigns, he had learned to read the signs of a society's true nature. Defensive positions, weapon emplacements, military structures, all the hallmarks of an aggressive species preparing for expansion and conquest. But what he saw below every expectation. The humans had built what appeared to be farms. Primitive but functional agricultural domes dotted the settlement, their transparent surfaces glowing with artificial sunlight. Children, actual younglings, played in enclosed areas while adults worked on construction projects that looked more like schools and hospitals than military installations. There wasn't a single visible weapon emplacement or defensive fortification. Run a deep scan on their energy signatures, A ordered. A activated her sensor array, her expression growing confused as data streamed across her display. Commander, I'm reading almost no military-grade power sources. Most of their energy is going to life support, agriculture, and what appears to be educational facilities. Weapons manufacturing. None detected, sir. There are some industrial fabricators, but they're producing farming equipment, construction materials, and toys. A's mandibles clicked faster, a sign of deep thought in his species. This made no sense. Every intelligence report indicated that humans were warlike creatures who viewed other species as either threats to be eliminated or resources to be exploited. Yet this settlement showed no signs of military preparation or aggressive expansion. A movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. A group of humans had emerged from one of the larger structures, and they were heading directly toward the ridge where his unit was hidden. A immediately signaled for combat positions, expecting some kind of attack or confrontation. But the humans weren't carrying weapons. Instead, they seemed to be carrying large containers and what looked like fabric bundles. They moved slowly, deliberately, with their hands visible and their posture non-threatening. Most confusing of all, they were heading straight toward the positions as if they knew exactly where the hidden soldiers were located. Sir, should we fire? A whispered, her weapon ready. Hold, let's see what they're doing. The lead human was a female with graying hair and weathered skin that spoke of long years under harsh conditions. She wore simple clothing and moved with the confidence of someone completely unafraid. Behind her, 3 other humans carried similar loads. When they reached the base of the ridge, the elderly female cupped her hands around her mouth and called out in surprisingly clear galactic standard. "We know you're up there. We've been watching your thermal signatures for 3 days. You must be freezing in this weather. We brought hot food and warm blankets." A nearly dropped his scope. In 40 years of military service, no enemy had ever offered him a meal. The woman's pronunciation was heavily accented but perfectly understandable, suggesting these humans had actually studied galactic languages. It's obviously a trap, a hissed. Humans are known for their deception. But I was studying the group more carefully. The elderly female was clearly unarmed. The containers they carried were steaming in the cold air, actually warm food, and the fabric bundles did indeed appear to be thick blankets designed for the planet's harsh climate. "My name is Dr. Sarah," the woman continued. "I'm the colony's director. I'm going to set this food down here and back away. You're welcome to it if you want it. I know your species doesn't handle cold as well as we do." She was right. Despite their advanced thermal suits, and his soldiers had been struggling with the planet's brutal climate. Their equipment was designed for normal combat operations, not extended surveillance in sub-freezing conditions. His soldiers had been rotating shifts every few hours just to prevent hypothermia. Doctor set down her container and stepped back with her hands raised in a gesture of peace. Her companions did the same, creating a small pile of supplies at the base of the ridge. Then, instead of retreating to safety, they simply sat down on nearby rocks and waited. "What are they doing?" I asked. "I have no idea," admitted. For nearly an hour, the humans simply waited. They didn't try to advance or retreat. They didn't attempt to communicate further or make any threatening moves. They just sat patiently in the freezing wind, occasionally checking on their supplies but otherwise remaining completely still. Finally, the wind shifted, and the smell of the food reached the positions. A's stomach cramped with hunger. They had been on minimal rations for days, and the aroma of warm, properly prepared food was almost overwhelming. "Sir," one of his soldiers whispered over the comm, "that actually smells edible." It was Corporal E, the unit's youngest member. He had been complaining about the cold and the ration packs since they arrived. Now he sounded genuinely intrigued by the humans' offer. "It could be poisoned," I pointed out. "Then why haven't they retreated?" I asked. "If they wanted to poison us, they would have left the food and gone back to safety. Instead, they're sitting in the open, vulnerable to our weapons." Doctor seemed to sense their hesitation. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device, a basic translation unit. When she spoke again, her words came through clearly in their native language. "I know you're probably afraid this is a trap. I understand that your species has had difficult encounters with other humans in the past. But we're not soldiers. We're colonists, scientists, teachers, farmers. We came here to build a new home, not to fight wars." She paused and looked directly at the ridge where it was hidden, as if she could see him through the rocks and camouflage. "We've been monitoring galactic communications since we arrived. We know the Council is concerned about human expansion. We know they sent you here to deal with us. But we also know that you've been sitting in the cold for 3 days, probably eating terrible military rations and trying to figure out why we're not behaving the way your intelligence reports said we would." A's 4 eyes widened. This human knew about their mission. She knew why they were here, and instead of running or fighting or hiding, she had brought them food. "I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you," Doctor continued. "This colony is an experiment, but not the kind your leaders probably think. We're not here to establish a military foothold or strip mine your resources or spread human control across the galaxy. We're here to prove that humans can be different, that we can be better." She gestured toward the settlement below. "Everyone in that colony volunteered for a one-way mission. We left Earth knowing we might never see our home again because we wanted to show the galaxy that humans are capable of peaceful coexistence. We came here not to conquer, but to learn how to live alongside other species." The wind howled across the ridge, and I watched one of the other humans, a young male, shiver visibly in the cold. Yet none of them moved to leave. They continued to wait patiently, offering their gifts with no apparent expectation of reward. "Sir," Corporal E spoke up again, "my thermal readings are showing dangerous levels. I need to warm up soon." I made a decision that would have been unthinkable at the start of this mission. "All units maintain concealment. I'm going down alone." "Commander," I protested, "that's extremely dangerous." "So is losing soldiers to hypothermia. Cover me. If anything goes wrong, proceed with the original mission." I carefully made his way down the rocky slope, his weapon ready but not aimed at the humans. Doctor smiled as he approached, not the predatory grin of a hunter, but the warm expression of someone genuinely pleased to see another being. "Thank you for trusting us," she said in. "I know this isn't easy." Up close, I could see that the humans were indeed suffering from the cold. Their lips were blue, their hands shaking, and their breath came in visible puffs. Yet they had waited. They had endured discomfort to ensure his soldiers had access to warm food and shelter. Why, he asked simply. Doctor opened one of the containers, releasing a wave of aromatic steam. Inside was some kind of stew with large chunks of meat and vegetables in a rich, thick broth. His stomach cramped with hunger just looking at it. Because you're cold and hungry and we can help with that, she said. It doesn't matter why you came here or what you were planning to do. Right now, in this moment, you need food and warmth. We have both. She ladled the stew into a bowl and offered it to him with both hands, a gesture of respect in culture that no human should have known. Along with it came a thick blanket that radiated warmth from some kind of battery-powered heating element. This is inefficient, said, though he accepted both offerings gratefully. You could have simply retreated to your settlement and called for reinforcements. We don't have any reinforcements to call, Doctor replied with a slight smile. And even if we did, what would be the point? You're not our enemy unless we make you one. The stew was delicious, rich and warming, with flavors that complemented taste preferences perfectly. Someone had actually researched his species' dietary needs and prepared food accordingly. You studied our biology, he observed. Of course, we've been studying all the major Galactic Council species since before we left Earth, not for military purposes, but because we wanted to be good neighbors. We learned your languages, your customs, your dietary requirements, your environmental preferences. We wanted to be prepared to coexist peacefully. As warmth spread through his body from the food and blanket, found himself facing a profound problem. Nothing about this situation matched his training or experience. These humans were supposed to be violent savages, yet they had just fed him better than his own military had in weeks. They were supposed to be planning conquest, yet their settlement showed no signs of military preparation. They were supposed to be deceptive and treacherous, yet they had openly acknowledged his mission and offered help anyway. Your intelligence reports about humans, Doctor said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. They're not wrong exactly. There are humans who are violent, who are conquering, who do terrible things to other species. But there are also humans who are kind, who are peaceful, who want nothing more than to grow crops and raise children and learn about the universe. She gestured toward the settlement again. Every person in that colony was carefully selected not for their military skills or their willingness to fight, but for their ability to cooperate, to build, to nurture. We spent 5 years preparing for this mission, learning everything we could about this planet and the species we might encounter. We came here hoping to prove that humans could be trusted as neighbors. The warmth from the stew and blanket was making a drowsy, not from poison, but from simple comfort after days of cold and inadequate food. Around him, the other humans waited patiently, occasionally stamping their feet or rubbing their hands to stay warm but never complaining or showing impatience. My mission, he said slowly, is to eliminate your colony. I know, Doctor replied, and I understand why the Council gave you that order. They're afraid of what humans might become if we spread across the galaxy. They've seen what happened when we encountered species in our own system. They don't want to repeat those mistakes. She was quiet for a moment, watching snow begin to fall from the darkening sky. But Commander, you've been watching us for 3 days. Have you seen anything that confirms their fears? Any weapons factories? Any military preparations? Any signs that we're planning to expand beyond this one small settlement? I had to admit that he hadn't. Everything he had observed suggested a peaceful community focused on agriculture, education, and simple survival. This could all be deception, he said, though without much conviction. It could be, Doctor agreed. But ask yourself, what would be the point? If we were really planning conquest, would we waste time and resources on elaborate theatrical productions for the benefit of one small military unit? Would we expose our leaders and risk our mission just to serve you dinner? The snow was falling more heavily now, and the wind was picking up. Without the warm food and heated blanket, I knew he would already be in serious trouble from the cold. Your people need this warmth too, he observed, noting how the humans were huddling together for heat. They'll be fine, Doctor said. We've adapted well to cold climates, but we won't leave while you're still out here. It wouldn't be right. That simple statement hit harder than any weapon could have. These humans were willing to endure discomfort, possibly even risk hypothermia, rather than abandon visitors to the elements. In all his years of military service, He had never encountered such behavior from any species, including his own. His comm unit crackled with a transmission from a "Commander, the weather is worsening rapidly. We need to make a decision soon." A looked at Doctor, who was watching him with patient, kind eyes despite the fact that her lips were turning blue from cold. "Come back with me," he said suddenly. "To my unit, bring your people." "I don't think that's a good idea," Doctor replied gently. "Your soldiers are trained to see us as enemies. Sudden movements or unexpected encounters could lead to violence." "Then what do you suggest?" She smiled despite the cold. "Why don't you all come to our settlement? We have proper heating, real beds, and a lot more food where this came from. You can complete your surveillance from inside where it's warm, and we can all avoid freezing to death in this storm." It was perhaps the most tactically unsound decision I had ever made. Everything in his training screamed against accepting an invitation into the heart of enemy territory. But as the wind howled and the snow fell harder, and as he felt the genuine warmth of both the blanket and the human compassion that had provided it, he found himself speaking into his calm. "All units, pack your gear. We're accepting an invitation to the human settlement." Human settlement was unlike any military installation I had ever seen. As his unit followed Doctor through the main gates, he found himself details that challenged every assumption he had made about human colonies. The walls were clearly defensive, but they were covered with what appeared to be artwork created by children, colorful paintings of alien landscapes, friendly creatures that looked like idealized versions of various Galactic Council species, and symbols that seemed to represent peace and cooperation. "Welcome to New Haven Colony," Doctor announced as they passed through the airlock system. The sudden warmth hit like a physical force, and he heard several of his soldiers sigh with relief as feeling returned to their extremities. Lieutenant kept her weapon ready but not aimed, her eyes scanning every corner for potential threats. "Sir, this could still be an elaborate trap." Doctor overheard and turned with that same patient smile. "Lieutenant, with respect, if we wanted to trap you, we could have simply left you on that ridge to freeze. 442B kills more efficiently than any weapon we could build." The settlement's interior was a maze of corridors connecting domed structures, but instead of the sterile military efficiency I expected, everything felt lived in and comfortable. The walls were lined with growing plants that served both decorative and air purification purposes. Soft lighting created warm pools of illumination rather than the harsh glare typical of military facilities. And everywhere there were signs of civilian life. Children's toys left in corners, personal artwork hanging on walls, the distant sound of laughter and conversation. "How many humans are in this settlement?" I asked. 237 adults, 46 children under the age of 16, Doctor replied without hesitation. "We're a small community, but we're growing." A's mandibles clicked in surprise. "You're telling us your exact population, your defensive capabilities." "Why wouldn't I? You could have counted our heat signatures from orbit if you really wanted to know. Secrets don't build trust." They entered a large central dome that served as a combination community center and cafeteria. The space buzzed with activity as humans of all ages went about their daily business. Children attended what appeared to be school lessons in one corner, while adults worked on various projects at tables throughout the room. The atmosphere was warm, bustling, and completely civilian. What struck him most powerfully was the reaction of the humans to his armed military unit. A few looked up with curiosity, some smiled and waved, and several children pointed excitedly at the soldiers' distinctive armor. But no one screamed, no one ran, and no one showed signs of fear or panic. "They're not afraid of us," Corporal E observed quietly. "Should they be?" asked a small voice nearby. A human child, perhaps 8 years old by their proportions, had approached the group with the fearless curiosity typical of younglings everywhere. She looked up at her with bright, interested eyes. "Sarah, come back here," called a woman from across the room, but she didn't sound panicked, more like a parent managing an overly social child. "It's all right," Doctor said. "Sarah's been studying culture in her xenobiology classes. She's probably excited to meet Real." The child, Sarah, beamed up at them. "Is it true that your species can see in 4 different spectrums simultaneously, and that you use mandible clicks for emotional communication? My teacher said yours has purple C's." I found himself staring down at this tiny human who was chattering excitedly about his people with the enthusiasm of a dedicated student. In all his military briefings, no one had ever mentioned that human children studied other species with genuine interest and admiration. Yes, he said slowly, we can perceive multiple light spectrums, and our does have purple oceans due to different algae compositions. Sarah's eyes went wide with delight. That's so amazing. I wish I could see like you do. What does this place look like in different spectrums? Are there colors we can't see? Doctor gently guided the child back toward her class. Maybe you can interview our guests later, Sarah. Right now, they need to warm up and eat. As they continued through the settlement, noticed more details that challenged his expectations. The hydroponics bays were indeed producing food, but not just nutrition paste or efficient protein sources. He saw vegetables and fruits from a dozen different worlds, including some native to space. When he mentioned this, Doctor nodded enthusiastically. We wanted to be able to offer familiar foods to any species we might encounter. It seemed like basic hospitality. We've been working on cultivation techniques for root vegetables, spice pods, even some of the crystal fruits from the outer rim worlds. This must have required enormous resources, I observed. Why invest in such variety when simple earth crops would be more efficient? Because efficiency isn't the only value that matters, replied Doctor, a tall human with graying hair who had joined their group. Doctor introduced him as the settlement's head of agriculture. Yes, we could have brought only earth crops and earth food processing, but imagine you're a trader whose ship breaks down near our colony. You're stranded for weeks while repairs are made. Wouldn't you rather eat foods that remind you of home instead of strange alien cuisine that might upset your digestive system? It was a perspective that had never occurred to his own people's colonies focused purely on military objectives and resource extraction. The idea of building a settlement specifically designed to be welcoming to other species was almost incomprehensible. They were led to a comfortable meeting room with furniture sized for various species, some chairs built for proportions, others for the tall ethereals, still others for the low-bodied. Doctor noticed examining the setup. We had to guess at some of the measurements from galactic databases, she admitted. I hope the chairs are reasonably comfortable. We can adjust them if needed. The furniture was indeed well designed for anatomy. Someone had put considerable thought into making alien visitors feel comfortable, down to the lighting levels and room temperature. Food began arriving almost immediately, not the single stew from earlier, but a variety of dishes from multiple culinary traditions. There were recognizably human foods, but also several dishes that looked familiar to from his. This is paste, he said, pointing to a bowl of purple spread. How did you learn to make paste? Trial and error, mostly, said Doctor with a laugh. We had the chemical composition from trade databases, but getting the texture and flavor right took months of experimentation. Doctor nearly poisoned himself testing early batches. Doctor grinned sheepishly. Worth it, though. The final recipe is pretty close to the original, isn't it? I tried the paste and had to admit it was indeed very close to what he remembered from home. The attention to detail was remarkable, and more than that, it suggested these humans had spent considerable time and effort learning to cater to his species' preferences. As the meal progressed, more colonists joined them. There was Doctor who peppered with questions about physiology, not for military intelligence, but out of genuine scientific curiosity. There was James Murphy, an engineer who was fascinated by technology and wanted to compare notes on different approaches to environmental control systems. There was Lisa Park, a teacher who was developing curriculum materials about different species and hoped to make them more accurate. We've been working from galactic databases and published research, Lisa explained, but nothing beats first-hand accounts. Would any of your people be willing to share stories about Our children are so curious about other species, but most of what we have access to is dry academic material. Lieutenant had been growing increasingly uncomfortable throughout the meal. Finally, she leaned close to and whispered in their native language. Sir, this has to be some kind of psychological operation. No species is this genuinely interested in peaceful contact with people they've never met. Doctor, who had been talking with James Murphy about engineering challenges, looked up at the sound of speech. I'm sorry, I couldn't help but overhear. Your lieutenant sounds concerned. Is there anything we can do to help her feel more comfortable? The casual admission that she had been listening to their private conversation should have been alarming. But Doctor's tone was so genuinely concerned that it was hard to take offense. She finds it difficult to believe that your interest in our culture is genuine, I said carefully. Instead of being offended, Doctor nodded thoughtfully. That's completely understandable. From her perspective, we're complete strangers who belong to a species with a reputation for violence and conquest. Trust has to be earned, especially when the stakes are this high. She turned to address it directly. Lieutenant, would it help if I showed you some of our historical records? You can see for yourself how this colony was planned and established. We've documented everything from the initial selection of colonists to our daily activities since arrival. A's mandibles clicked in surprise. You would share classified information with enemy soldiers. First, we don't consider you enemies unless you decide to be our enemies. Second, none of our information is classified. One of our core principles is transparency. We knew that any successful peaceful contact would require openness and honesty. Doctor activated a wall display that showed detailed records of the colony's establishment. Personnel files, mission plans, resource allocation charts, daily logs, all of it readily accessible and apparently unedited. Here, she said, pointing to a document titled Colonial Charter and Mission Statement. This is what we signed before leaving Earth. Every colonist agreed to these principles. I read the document with growing amazement. It wasn't a military charter or a resource extraction contract. It was a commitment to peaceful coexistence, environmental stewardship, and mutual respect for all species. The colonists had legally bound themselves to non-aggression and cooperation. These are not legally binding under Galactic Council law, I pointed out. Human law has no jurisdiction here. You're absolutely right, Doctor agreed. But they're binding on us because we choose to honor them. We didn't come here to conquer or exploit. We came here to prove that humans can be good neighbors. Doctor pulled up additional files. Here are our resource usage projections. We're designed to be completely self-sufficient within 5 years with minimal environmental impact. We're not strip mining or over-harvesting. We're not even expanding beyond this valley unless the local ecosystem can support it. The data supported his claims. The colony's resource usage was modest and sustainable. Their expansion plans were limited and careful. Everything suggested a small community focused on long-term stability rather than rapid growth or resource extraction. Why, I asked suddenly, why do all this? Why invest so much effort in building trust with species you might never even encounter? The question hung in the air for a moment. Doctor exchanged glances with her colleagues, and I could see some kind of silent communication passing between them. Because, Doctor said finally, humanity has made terrible mistakes. In our own solar system, when we first encountered other intelligence, we reacted with fear and aggression. We destroyed civilizations out of paranoia. We committed acts that still shame us as a species. Her voice grew quiet and sad. When we finally learned to communicate with the survivors, when we understood what we had done, it nearly broke us as a people. We realized that first contact with other species would define who we were as a civilization. We could become a species known for conquest and destruction, or we could become something better. Doctor continued the story. That's why this colony exists. We're not representatives of human military or government. We're volunteers who wanted to prove that humans could choose a different path. Every person here gave up everything they had on Earth for the chance to make this statement. What statement? I asked. That humans can learn from our mistakes, that we can choose cooperation over conquest, that we want to be part of the galactic community, not its destroyers. Lisa Park opened another file on the display. Look at this. These are our children's school projects from the last month. The screen filled with drawings, essays, and presentations created by young humans. But instead of celebrating human achievements or superiority, the projects all focused on other species. I saw a detailed essay about art forms, a painting of an ethereal ceremonial dance, a sculpture representing architectural styles. Our children are learning that the universe is full of wonderful, intelligent, creative species, Lisa explained. They're growing up seeing diversity as something to celebrate, not something to fear. One particular project caught A's attention. It was a story written by a 10-year-old human child, illustrated with careful drawings. The story was about a young soldier who got lost on an alien world and was helped by kind strangers from another species. The drawings showed the human characters offering food and shelter without question. This child has never met a before today, Lisa noted. But she wrote this story because she was taught that kindness to strangers is important, regardless of what species they belong to. I was studying the personnel files with intense focus. Commander, look at this. These colonists aren't soldiers or government agents. They're teachers, scientists, farmers, engineers, civilians. And look at their psychological profiles. Every single person was screened for cooperative tendencies and lack of aggressive impulses. It was true. The colony was comprised entirely of humans who had been selected specifically for their ability to work peacefully with others. Many had backgrounds in education, diplomacy, or social work. Several were former refugees who had personal experience with the importance of kindness to strangers. You built a colony of pacifists, or observed. Not pacifists exactly, Doctor corrected. We're not helpless and we're not naive about the dangers of the universe, but we are people who believe that peace is worth working for, even when it's difficult. As if to prove her point, she activated another display that showed the colony's defensive systems. They did exist, but they were entirely non-lethal. Barrier fields, stunning devices, escape routes, everything designed to protect without causing permanent harm. We're not defenseless, James Murphy explained. But our defenses are designed to give us time to communicate and negotiate rather than to destroy attackers. The tour continued for another hour, with the humans showing every aspect of their settlement with complete openness. I saw their medical facilities, which were equipped to treat injuries from a dozen different species. He saw their communication center, which monitored Galactic Council broadcasts and had been tracking his unit's presence since their arrival. He saw their cultural center, where colonists studied the art, music, and literature of other civilizations. Most remarkably, he saw their memorial garden. It was a quiet space filled with plants from many different worlds, dedicated to the victims of humanity's past mistakes. Each plant represented a species that had suffered from human aggression, and plaques told their stories with unflinching honesty. We don't want to forget what we've done wrong, Doctor explained quietly. This garden reminds us why we're here and what we're trying to become. By the time they returned to the meeting room, the storm outside had intensified into a full blizzard. Through the transparent aluminum windows, I could see that the landscape had been transformed into a white wasteland, where nothing could survive without shelter. You'll have to stay the night, Doctor said matter-of-factly. Even our heated vehicles couldn't make it back to your ship in this weather. It should have been a tactical nightmare, spending the night in an enemy settlement with no way to retreat or call for backup. But somehow, surrounded by friendly humans who had spent the day treating them as honored guests rather than invaders, I found that he wasn't worried about their safety. We have guest quarters prepared, Doctor continued. Private rooms with environmental controls set for comfort, unless you'd prefer to sleep together for security reasons. The offer of privacy was another shock. Keeping his soldiers separated would make them more vulnerable, but it would also demonstrate trust on both sides. Private quarters will be acceptable, I decided, but we will maintain our equipment and communications. Of course, we've already set up charging stations compatible with your gear, and please feel free to communicate with your command as needed. We're not trying to hide anything from the Galactic Council. As his soldiers were shown to their rooms, I found himself alone with Doctor in the meeting room. Outside, the wind howled like something alive, but inside it was warm and peaceful. Your mission, Doctor said quietly, is to determine whether this colony poses a threat to galactic security. Yes. And what will you report? I looked out at the storm, thinking about everything he had seen and experienced. I don't know, he admitted. Nothing here matches our intelligence about human behavior. You should be aggressive, expansionist, deceptive. Instead, you feed enemy soldiers and open your homes to armed strangers. Doctor smiled sadly. Commander, may I ask you something? In your military experience, when you've encountered truly dangerous enemies, how did they behave? The question made him think about past campaigns. They fortified their positions. They gathered intelligence on our weaknesses. They prepared weapons and defenses. They tried to deceive us about their true capabilities. And what have we done? You've shown us everything. You've demonstrated no significant defenses. You've provided us with detailed intelligence about your capabilities and limitations. You've made yourselves completely vulnerable to attack. Does that sound like the behavior of a species planning conquest? I had to admit that it didn't. Every strategic principle he had learned suggested that the humans were either completely harmless or so supremely confident in their abilities that they felt no need for conventional defenses. Given what he had observed of their actual capabilities, the latter seemed highly unlikely. But humans in other systems have been aggressive, he pointed out. Your species has a documented history of violence. Yes, we do, but so do the ethereals. So do most species when they feel threatened or desperate. The question isn't whether humans are capable of violence. We clearly are. The question is whether this particular group of humans chooses peace when it's offered. It was a distinction that I had never considered. His training focused on species-wide assessments and threat levels. The idea that individual human communities might have fundamentally different values and goals challenged his entire framework for understanding potential enemies. Tomorrow, Doctor continued, when the storm clears, you can return to your ship and make your report to the Galactic Council. You can recommend orbital bombardment or military occupation or whatever response seems appropriate based on what you've observed here. She stood up and moved toward the door, then paused. But before you decide, ask yourself this. If the Galactic Council destroys this colony, what message does that send to other humans who might be considering peaceful expansion? What does it tell them about whether cooperation with alien species is possible? She left him alone with that thought, and has spent a long time staring out at the storm, wondering whether he was about to make the most important decision of his military career. The morning brought crystalline clarity to 442b as the storm system moved away toward the distant mountains. I stood at the window of his guest quarters, watching human children play in the fresh snow outside. They had built some kind of sculpture, a rough approximation of a soldier complete with 4 arms and mandibles. Instead of making it threatening, however, they had surrounded it with smaller figures representing various alien species, all holding hands in a circle. A soft chime indicated someone was at his door. I opened it to find young Sarah, the human child who had peppered him with questions the day before. She was carrying a tray with what appeared to be breakfast. "Doctor thought you might be hungry," she said, balancing the tray carefully. "I volunteered to bring it because I wanted to ask you something." I accepted the tray, nodding that the meal had been prepared specifically for dietary needs. High protein content, low sugar, and spiced with flavor compounds that complemented his species' taste preferences. "What did you want to ask?" Sarah's eyes were bright with curiosity, but also something else, a kind of earnest hope that made her seem older than her years. "Are you going to hurt us?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. Human adults had spent the previous day carefully avoiding any direct acknowledgement of the threat his unit represented, despite their obvious awareness of the situation. This child simply asked what everyone else was thinking. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "That depends on many factors." "But do you want to hurt us? I mean, do you think we're bad people who deserve to be hurt?" I looked down at this small human who was asking profound questions about morality and justice with the straightforward honesty of youth. How could he explain the complexities of galactic politics and military necessity to someone who clearly saw the world in terms of kindness and fairness? "No," he said finally, "I do not think you are bad people." Sarah smiled with relief. "Good, because my teacher says that most problems between people happen because they don't understand each other. She says that if people just talked more and listened better, there would be a lot less fighting." With that simple observation, she skipped away, leaving O with his breakfast and the uncomfortable realization that an 8-year-old human had just articulated a principle that the Galactic Council had apparently never considered. His comm unit signaled an incoming message from his ship. Lieutenant A's voice came through clearly. "Commander, we've received new orders from Fleet Command. They want an immediate status report." "Understood. Have all units prepare for departure within the hour." As he gathered his equipment, I reflected on the past 18 hours. Everything he had experienced challenged not only his assumptions about humans, but his understanding of what constituted a threat to galactic security. The New Haven colony showed no signs of aggressive intent, no capability for military expansion, and no evidence of the deceptive planning that typically preceded human conquest. But that was exactly what made them so dangerous. Doctor was waiting for him in the central dome when he arrived for departure. The colonists had gathered to see them off, not as a show of force or intimidation, but as a simple courtesy. Many held small gifts, preserved foods, handmade crafts, data tablets containing cultural information about human society. For your journey home, Doctor explained, and to share with anyone who might be interested in learning about us. Lieutenant examined one of the data tablets suspiciously. These could contain viruses or propaganda. They could, Doctor agreed, but they don't. Feel free to scan them thoroughly. You'll find children's stories, historical records, scientific papers, art, music, nothing more or less than a basic introduction to human culture. Doctor stepped forward with a carefully wrapped package. This is for you personally, Commander, he said to a seeds from our agricultural dome. They're compatible with soil conditions and climate. If you ever want to try growing earth vegetables on these will get you started. The gesture was so unexpected and personal that I found himself momentarily speechless. No enemy had ever given him gardening supplies. Thank you, he managed, but why? Because sharing food is how humans make friends, Doctor replied with a smile, and we hope that someday we might be friends. As they prepared to leave the settlement, Doctor walked alongside toward the main gate. Her expression was thoughtful, and he could sense that she had something important to say. Commander, I want you to understand that we know what you're facing. We know that recommending mercy for this colony might damage your career, might make you appear weak to your superiors. We know that the safe choice for you personally is to recommend our destruction. A's mandibles clicked in surprise. You are concerned about my career prospects. We're concerned about you as an individual. You've shown us courtesy and respect, even though your orders were to treat us as enemies. You listened to our explanations with an open mind. You've been fair and honorable, and we don't want our situation to cause you harm. It was perhaps the most remarkable thing anyone had ever said to him. These humans, facing potential annihilation, were worried about the personal consequences he might face for showing them mercy. Therefore, Doctor continued, I want to give you something that might help justify a recommendation for non-interference. She handed him a sealed data packet. These are detailed technical specifications for our defensive systems, our resource extraction methods, our population projections, and our expansion plans. Everything the Galactic Council would need to verify that we represent no military threat. I examined the packet. It was comprehensive, detailed, and would have taken his intelligence unit weeks to compile through surveillance and infiltration. You're giving me complete intelligence about your colony. Yes, because transparency is the only foundation for trust. If the Council reviews this information, they'll see that we're exactly what we claim to be. A small, peaceful community with no capability or intention of threatening galactic security. The gesture was so contrary to normal military thinking that it almost seemed like madness. No colony, no matter how peaceful, should willingly provide complete intelligence about themselves to potential enemies. Doctor, he said slowly, do you understand that this information could be used to destroy you more efficiently? That you've just told us exactly where to target strikes for maximum damage? Yes, we understand that. But we also understand that living in fear and secrecy is not the life we want for our children. We would rather trust and be betrayed than survive through deception and paranoia. As they reached the gate, the entire community had gathered to see them off. Children waved enthusiastically, adults smiled and called out good wishes, and several teenagers proudly displayed artwork they had created depicting and human figures working together on various projects. One more thing, Doctor said as I prepared to leave. If the Council decides that our experiment has failed, if they determine that this colony must be destroyed, we want you to know that we don't blame you. You're a soldier following orders, trying to protect your people and your civilization. We understand that and we respect it. She paused, looking back at the settlement where humans continued their daily lives, despite knowing that their future hung in the balance. But if there's any possibility, any chance at all that the Council might consider allowing us to continue our experiment, please remember what you've seen here. Remember that we chose peace when we could have chosen war. Remember that we offered friendship when we could have offered hostility. Remember that we trusted you with our lives because we believe that trust has to start somewhere. The journey back to his ship passed in contemplative silence. A's soldiers walked with thoughtful expressions, each processing what they had experienced in their own way. Corporal E carried a small human toy that one of the children had insisted he take. Lieutenant A repeatedly examined the cultural data tablets as if trying to decode some hidden meaning in the human artwork and stories. When they reached their concealed ship, A gathered his unit for debriefing before contacting Fleet Command. Observations, he requested simply. The humans showed no evidence of military preparation or aggressive intent, reported Sergeant O, the unit's intelligence specialist. Their defensive systems are minimal and non-lethal. Their resource extraction is sustainable and limited. Their population is stable with no signs of rapid expansion. Their behavior was consistent with stated peaceful intentions, added Corporal E. They demonstrated trust, transparency, and concern for our welfare despite knowing our mission. Lieutenant O was quiet for a long moment before speaking. Sir, I've been trained to identify deception, manipulation, and hidden threats. I found no evidence of any of those things. These humans appear to genuinely believe in peaceful coexistence. Appear to believe or actually believe? Actually believe, sir. Their actions, their resource allocation, their long-term planning, their children's education, everything is consistent with a sincere commitment to peace. I activated the communication array to contact Fleet Command. Admiral H's image appeared on the display, his 4 eyes immediately focusing on it with expectant intensity. Commander, report on the human threat assessment. For 40 years, I had given clear, concise military reports based on objective analysis of enemy capabilities and intentions. This report would be different. Admiral, the New Haven colony consists of 237 adult humans and 46 juveniles. They possess minimal defensive capabilities, all non-lethal. Their resource extraction is limited and sustainable. They show no evidence of military preparation or expansionist planning. Are you recommending orbital bombardment? The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Around him, I could feel his soldiers watching, waiting to see what their commander would decide. Sir, I am recommending continued observation, but no immediate military action. The Admiral's mandibles clicked sharply. Commander, your orders were clear. Assess and eliminate the human presence. With respect, Admiral, elimination may not be necessary. This colony represents no military threat to galactic security. All human expansion represents a potential threat. You know their history, Commander. I know their history, but I also know what I observed. Admiral, these humans have voluntarily provided complete intelligence about their colony, including detailed defensive specifications and population data. They have demonstrated consistent, peaceful behavior and have made no aggressive moves despite knowing they were under surveillance. A pause, thinking about young Sarah's question, are you going to hurt us? Furthermore, sir, I believe that destroying a genuinely peaceful human settlement might actually increase the threat to galactic security. Explain. If humans who choose peace are destroyed by the Council, it sends a clear message to other human communities. Cooperation is futile, and they must choose conquest or death. We risk creating the very threat we're trying to prevent. The Admiral was silent for a long time, his 4 eyes studying A's image. You are certain this colony represents no immediate threat? I am certain, sir. Very well. Continue observation for an additional 30 days. Provide detailed daily reports. But Commander, if you are wrong about these humans, if they show any signs of deception or aggression, you will correct the situation immediately. Understood, sir. As the communication ended, Lieutenant approached her commander. Sir, that was risky. Yes, it was. Why did you do it? A thought about Doctor's words about trust having to start somewhere. He thought about the children playing in the snow, building sculptures of different species working together. He thought about the memorial garden where humans remembered their past mistakes and committed to doing better. Because 30 years from now, Lieutenant, when you're a commander making similar decisions, I want you to remember that sometimes the most important military action is choosing not to fight. Over the following days, I established a permanent observation post near the human settlement. But rather than maintaining hostile surveillance, he found his unit gradually developing a relationship with the colonists. The humans regularly sent supplies to the position, not as bribes or attempts at manipulation, but as simple acts of neighborly kindness. Doctor would sometimes visit the observation post to share information about the colony's activities, always bringing hot food and warm conversation. She never asked about military matters or tried to influence A's reports. Instead, she talked about the challenges of growing crops in alien soil, the excitement of her students learning about other species, the satisfaction of building something peaceful in a universe too often defined by conflict. The breakthrough came on the 15th day when Corporal E was injured during a routine patrol. A shifting ice shelf had collapsed, trapping him under several tons of frozen debris. The injury was serious but not immediately life-threatening. His armor had prevented critical damage, but he needed medical attention that their field equipment couldn't provide. A was preparing to call for medical evacuation when Doctor's voice came over their communication system. "Commander, we've detected the emergency beacon. Our medical facility can treat Corporal E's injuries if you're willing to bring him to the colony." It should have been an easy decision to refuse. Bringing an injured soldier into potential enemy territory violated every military protocol. But I found himself thinking about the humans who had sat in the cold wind for hours just to offer warm food to strangers. 20 minutes later, Corporal E was in the colony's medical center, receiving treatment from Dr. Susan Martinez, a human physician who had extensive training in alien physiology. "The fractures are clean and the internal bleeding is minimal," Dr. Martinez reported as she worked. "We can have him fully healed in 3 days with proper treatment." "You're equipped to treat injuries." "We're equipped to treat injuries from most Galactic Council species." It seemed like a reasonable precaution for a colony that hoped to have peaceful contact with other races. As Corporal E recovered, I found himself spending more time in the human settlement, not as a spy or infiltrator, but as something he had never been before, a guest. The humans included him in their daily activities with casual friendliness. He attended community meetings where colonists discussed mundane issues like crop rotation schedules and educational curriculum. He watched children's performances of traditional human stories. He participated in conversations about art, philosophy, and the nature of civilization. Most remarkably, he found himself contributing to these discussions. When the colonists faced a problem with their atmospheric processors, his engineering knowledge helped them find a solution. When they wanted to understand cultural practices for a school project, he provided detailed explanations. When they needed advice about potential weather patterns, his military training in environmental analysis proved valuable. It was Doctor who finally put it into words. "You've become part of our community." They were sitting in the colony's small library, surrounded by books and data tablets representing the literature of dozens of species. Outside, snow was falling again, but inside it was warm and peaceful. "I am still a military observer," A protested. "My duty is to assess your threat level." "And what have you concluded?" A was quiet for a long time, thinking about everything he had experienced over the past month. "I have concluded that threat assessment may be the wrong framework entirely." "What do you mean?" "Military analysis focuses on capability and intent to cause harm, but you have forced me to consider a different question: capability and intent to cause good." Doctor smiled. "That's a lovely way to put it." "Your colony has demonstrated something I did not think was possible," A continued. "You have shown that a human community can choose peace over conquest, cooperation over exploitation, trust over fear. You have proven that first contact between species can be an opportunity for friendship rather than conflict." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "Doctor, I believe your experiment has succeeded, but I also believe it has created a new kind of responsibility." "What kind of responsibility?" "If New Haven Colony survives and prospers, it becomes a model for human expansion throughout the galaxy. Other human communities will study your methods, adopt your principles, and attempt to replicate your success. The peaceful humans will spread across the stars." "That sounds like a good outcome." "It is a good outcome, but it also means that the Galactic Council's response to your colony will determine the future of human-alien relations for generations to come. If we destroy you, we teach humanity that peace is weakness. If we accept you, we invite humanity to join the galactic community as partners rather than conquerors." Doctor leaned back in her chair, understanding the full weight of what he was saying. So the question isn't just whether this colony succeeds or fails. No, the question is what kind of galaxy we want to live in. One where different species meet as enemies, or one where we meet as potential friends. That night, A composed his final report to Admiral H. It was the most important document he had ever written, and he knew that its contents would influence galactic policy for decades to come. Admiral, he began, after 30 days of close observation and interaction, I can conclusively state that New Haven Colony represents no military threat to galactic security. However, it does represent something far more significant, an opportunity to fundamentally change the nature of human expansion into galactic space. He went on to detail everything he had observed, experienced, and learned. He described the colony's genuine commitment to peace, their transparent governance, their respect for alien cultures, and their dedication to environmental sustainability. He included testimony from his soldiers, cultural analysis of human behavior, and detailed projections of what human expansion might look like if guided by New Haven's principles. I am therefore recommending not only that this colony be permitted to continue, but that it be formally recognized as humanity's first successful peaceful settlement outside their home system. I further recommend that the Galactic Council establish formal diplomatic relations with New Haven Colony as a first step toward eventual human membership in the galactic community. It was a radical recommendation that went far beyond his original mission parameters. But as I looked out at the lights of the human settlement, where people of all ages were going about their peaceful lives, he knew it was the right choice. Tomorrow, Admiral H would read the report. Tomorrow, the Galactic Council would begin debating humanity's future. Tomorrow, decisions would be made that would echo across the galaxy for generations. But tonight, for the first time in his military career, Commander went to sleep believing that he had helped create something better than victory. He had helped create hope,